Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. If we can all take our seats. Thank you. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kernahan Webb. I am the director of the Ryerson Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Law and Business here in the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University. Today is November the 21st. You may wonder why I'm saying that. And it is Toronto, Canada, at Ryerson University. And I'm saying that because this particular event is live cast. And what do I mean by live cast? It means that right now it is being made accessible online for people that we know are watching around the world, actually. And I just wanted to give you a notice, first of all, with respect to that there will be an occasional panning of the camera around the room. And so this is your notice that although no one is going to be focused on other than the speakers, there may be an occasional video pan to the audience. And so please consider this your notice as your consent to have your likeness recorded. And the event later on will be accessible for others. So with that preliminary notice out of the way, let me return to the opening remarks. The Ryerson Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility holds regular talks on social responsibility issues of one sort or another. All of the talks are done with in the spirit of constructive engagement. That is to say, none of us feel that we have the market cornered on what is right, and we are all exploring the truth and seeking better ways of doing things. And we ask that everyone approach these discussions in that light. And if you do, then there will be opportunities for constructive discussions of one sort or another. Thank you very much for that. This event is organized by the Ryerson University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility, but it is co-sponsored by a number of fine student organizations here at Ryerson University. One is the Ryerson Corporate Social Responsibility Student Association, and very fine organization that allows students to explore CSR issues in greater depth than is possible within the class, and they do a great job on that. Another is the Ryerson Commerce and Government Association, which, as you can tell from the name, basically is focusing on that nexus between commerce and government, and so CSR topics are of great interest to them. And the third is the Ryerson Law and Business Student Association. And again, another organization that I think you can understand would be keenly interested in CSR issues because they tend to blur over into law quite regularly. So just a shout out to those fine student organizations here at Ryerson. And then in addition to that, we have two external organizations that are providing support. One is the CSA Group, it's Canadian Standards Association, and the other is the Trade Commissioner Service of Global Affairs Canada. And these two other organizations are what I would call organizations that are in the rule business. That is to say, they are basically on a day-to-day basis, among other things, they develop rules that pertain oftentimes to corporate social responsibility topics. One does it, the CSA Group does it as a non-profit organization, not-for-profit organization. It's not a governmental body. And Vanessa from the CSA will tell you more about them in a second. And the Trade Commissioner Service of Global Affairs Canada. Global Affairs Canada is the leading federal government department responsible for foreign affairs type issues. And within it, they have a number of units, including the Trade Commissioner Service, who basically assists in assist Canadian businesses around the world in terms of being effective in all of their activities around the world. And we're grateful to the support of both of these organizations as external supporters for this work. So I'll say a little bit about whistleblowing in a second, but in terms of preliminary notices, we have this notice about the fact that your likeness may be recorded. An additional point is that for those of you who are accessing from out of town, if you can email me with your questions, I will do my best to include those in the question part of this discussion, the question part generally follows the formal presentations by the speakers. And if you could just indicate in your subject heading that you have a question, that would help me to sort it out. If you can indicate where you're emailing from, that's also kind of an interesting thing to have when we repeat your question. And then a final point, and this is a point that Sandy will come back to momentarily, is that the Whistleblowing Systems Guide that he participated in the development of, and his organization supported in the development of, along with the CSA, is in fact freely accessible. And there is the rather long URL in order to access it. And it's a slightly complicated process to get a copy. So suffice it to say, if you can't get that down quickly now, email me and I will provide you with the full URL later. So that takes care of the kind of the administrative remarks. I'm going to turn my attention now to the substantive subject matter at hand, namely whistleblowing and its connection to corporate social responsibility. So as I think you will all appreciate, we have in our audience today students, professors from both Ryerson University and other universities. And we also have got non-governmental organizations, consultants, government officials, and members of the public that are interested. But we have basically a very capable group of people in the audience. And I'm going to suggest to you that our approach will be that if you have a question, that you keep your question until the end of the speaker talks, unless you have a what I would call a hot pursuit question. A hot pursuit question is a question where you're just asking for a quick clarification to something that was said, as opposed to a more substantive comment. If we can proceed that way. The topic of whistleblowing is of relevance to whether you are in government, in the private sector, or in a civil society, NGO type organization or community organization. And basically it's all about the fact that people within organizations and people from outside organizations oftentimes are in a position to observe potentially problematic activity and good activity, but potentially problematic activity is generally the focus. And that sort of information can be very, very helpful to the proper running of whatever is the organization. It can be bringing to the attention of the organization an incidence of non-compliance, but maybe not. Maybe it's just something that somebody says, I'm not sure whether or not this is right or not, or it might even be a positive sort of saying, we saw this and we support this sort of activity. But at any rate, they don't necessarily know where to go, and they don't necessarily know what happens when they provide that information. Is it going to turn around and going to be about as much on me, the person who provided the information, as opposed to what it is I'm providing? And so there's concerns about how are you going to use that information? Will I essentially be grilled as to what it is I say? And although most of us will start from the proposition that bringing forward this sort of information is done in good faith, and it normally will be, there is also the potential for mischief in terms of people bringing forward information. So we need to come up with approaches that allow individuals to bring forward information to organizations and understand exactly where it's going, how it's being used, and how their connection to the organization is going to be treated. So it's a very, very critically important issue. It's an issue that in Canada and in other parts of the world is increasingly attracting direct legal attention in the sense of legislation and regulations set up that will essentially reward a whistleblower for bringing forward information if that information leads to a conviction in that sort of situation. That's started to happen here in Canada. But also there's legislation in place that is designed to protect the whistleblower, to say if you do bring forward this information, you are safe from reprisals. Let's say you're an employee, safe from reprisals from your employer, which can be an issue. So all of that is to say whistleblowing is a potentially extremely important part of an effective overall corporate social responsibility approach for any organization, public, private, or civil society type organization, and guidance on exactly how to do it is something that is very much needed. When you can bring together people who have expertise in that area and they can essentially distill their wisdom into a few pages on that issue and make it freely available, which is exactly the process that took place with respect to this guide, that can be something that could be an important part on a going forward basis of the effective social responsibility of that organization. So that is all that I would like to say in the way of introductory remarks. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to ask if we can have Vanessa come up to the front. Vanessa from the CSA. I would ask to start off, Vanessa, if you could just say a few words about yourself. And then Vanessa is just going to say a few words about the CSA as an organization. And then once Vanessa provides us with those introductory remarks, we're going to be in a position to turn to our keynote speaker, who is Sandy Boucher, and he's from Grant Thornton, and I will provide a few more detailed remarks concerning him in a few minutes after Vanessa says a few words about the CSA. So without further ado, I'm passing things over to Vanessa from the CSA. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. Can you
do that? And here you go. It's just
down button?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Vanessa Mitchell. I work at CSA. I've been at CSA for over 13 years now as a project manager in the Environment and Business Excellence Group and Sustainability. I just want to give you a few words about CSA Group, and then as far as the details of the whistleblowing, the development of the whistleblowing standard document, I will pass it over to Sandy Boucher. So just a quick agenda, overview of CSA Group, for those of you who aren't familiar, overview of our standards division, how standards work, and then we'll move on. So CSA Group is an international organization that has three arms, so to speak, three divisions: standards, product certification and testing, and consumer product evaluation. We have locations all across the world, but are headquartered here in Toronto at Rexdale Boulevard. My involvement with CSA is predominantly in the standards world, and so I will speak a little bit more about that. The CSA Group overall is a private, not-for-profit, membership-based organization. We were established in 1919, so many, many years. We'll be celebrating our, what are we up to? Oh, our 100th anniversary. We're the largest, we have the largest, most diversified standards development organization in Canada, and we have 1 billion products worldwide that bear the CSA mark, safety mark. Our standards are developed by volunteers. We have 3,000 codes and standards that are referenced in building codes and various legislation, 54 areas of technology, and 9,000 expert committee members who are all volunteers who work on technical committees to develop these standards. And not only standards, but we develop documents that are guidelines as well. and 140 dedicated staff. This is standards only I'm talking about. Some of the areas that we develop standards in are health and safety, fuel burning, environment and business excellence, energy and utilities, and electrotechnical. The area that I'm from is the environment and business excellence area, and that's also the division that the whistleblowing standard came from. So basically how standards work is all standards are developed, like I said, by technical committees of experts. And once a standard is published, it's considered a voluntary standard unless the standard is referenced in a building code or a legislation. Once it's referenced in a building code or legislation, then it's considered a legal document. We have 50% of our standards referenced in various legislations. The electrical code, for an example, is one of them. And 40% of the CSA construction standards are in regulation. Yes. And regulatory bodies decide whether the standard can be referenced in the building code or the legislation. Some of the areas in the business management sustainability area, which is what I'm from, that we cover is we hold the international secretariats and chair roles of some of these technical committees that look after standards involved in ISO 14001, which some of you might be familiar with, ISO 9001, 50001 on energy management, social responsibility, which we did a talk here, I think in June on, and sustainable development in communities. We hold, on behalf of Canada, we hold the International Secretariat, and those standards are developed by bigger international technical committees. Some of the, what we call homegrown standards or national standards, which are Canadian only, that fall in this group is standards on recycling, household appliances, sustainability of household appliances, I should say. We also do standards on household appliances and energy efficiency, but that's in a different division. We have some documents on Métis land registries, which is kind of interesting, process safety management, sustainable events, and of course whistleblowing, which is what we are talking about today. And we also have registries for organizations to register their greenhouse gas emissions, as well as environmental product declarations. Again, just to highlight some of our homegrown standards, whistleblowing, which is what Mr. Sandy Boucher is going to be speaking of in a few minutes, some occupational health and safety standards, forest management, and process safety management. So CSA Group's mission is to create a better, safer, more sustainable world where standards work for people in business, and we do that through those standards. Little quick overview I just gave you of CSA.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
So let me just get this party started. So now we have our keynote speaker, who's Mr. Sandy Boucher, and Mr. Boucher is the senior manager at Grant Thornton, and he is one of the co-conveners of the CSA process for the development of the whistleblowing guide, whistleblowing systems guide. And he's a specialist in fraud and corruption investigations with a really significant background in due diligence inquiries, asset tracing and recovery, managing major investigations and security. He works on detecting and preventing fraud and corruption, and divides his time between investigating such cases and advising organizations on how to prevent them from occurring. He's led and conducted a wide range of investigations, including a number of high-level corruption probes, and has testified around the world in both civil and criminal courts. And he heads the Grant Thornton National Investigative Research and Anti-Corruption Practice Unit. He has over 33 years of experience as an investigator, including 12 with the Royal Hong Kong Police and 21 years in the private sector. And he's been with Grant Thornton now for 7 years. So without further ado, I'd like to pass things over to Mr. Sandy Boucher.
So There's two things that happened to me in Canada. Number one, people think I'm French. I'm actually English, as you can tell by my strange accent, so it's actually Sandy Boucher. The other thing that happens, not when I'm in front of the camera, is that people assume that Sandy's a girl. And they say, where is she? Is she coming? So today, you're okay. You can see that I'm here. I think I'm going to get this right. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit on what I feel is a very important topic. It's the topic of whistleblowing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to present to you a document which I think is extremely useful and which was developed by the CSA. I'll explain a little bit about the history of why, how that came to be. I'm also going to explain to you about why this is important and why right now, as I'm going to show you, things are changing. We're kind of at a tipping point where finally whistleblowers are being seen in the right light. We have not got to where we need to be, but we're making good progress. Whistleblowers are starting to come out of the shadows. But at the end of the day, whistleblowers are messengers, and you all know what we do with messengers, right? Yeah. That's what happens to messengers. And that is funny, but that's actually true. So the statistics from here and from around the world show that minimum of 80% of all whistleblowers suffer whistleblower retaliation of some form or another. And let me be clear, sometimes that's that you get shunned in the workplace. But sometimes, as with the case that I'll show you, you get threats from mobsters. You get death threats. Sometimes you end up with mental health issues. You lose your job, you lose your livelihood, you lose your home, you lose your family. I have a friend I'm going to talk about in a little bit who had mental health issues for 20 years. And now, last Friday, his story's in the newspaper in Ottawa. So I want you to be really clear that whistleblower retaliation is a big issue and one of the reasons why I'm here. We need to understand who whistleblowers are and why they do what they do. I'm going to give you a brief introduction as why I care about this, and I do care about this. As you heard, I was a police officer in Asia for a long time. I worked with whistleblowers. In the police world, we call them informers, people who tell us what the criminals are up to. And some of the things about whistleblowers that still exist today come from the world of dealing with criminals, and I'll explain that. I dealt with informers of all different kinds, and in the private sector here in Canada, I've been looking at the world of fraud and corruption for 20 years. My company, Grant Thornton, runs a whistleblower hotline service, and so I'm on a list of people that every day we get calls from whistleblowers. We talk to them, we listen to their story, we make sure it gets to the people who need to hear it, and quite often we work on the investigation. So I deal with a lot of whistleblowers, and I see what happens to them, and I see sometimes what management does to the information or with the information, and sometimes what they don't do, all of which are important. The case I want you to go and Google later on is a guy called Brian McAdam, M-C-A-D-A-M. He worked for what was then DFATE. He was a foreign affairs immigration officer in Hong Kong, where I was working. After Tiananmen Square, a lot of people in Hong Kong were scared. They wanted out. And Canada looked like a pretty good place to go. So they started applying. Many of the people that applied, it turned out, or a significant percentage, were criminals, convicted criminals, organized crime figures. And so some of us who were in law enforcement started giving information to our colleagues in places like the RCMP and Canadian Immigration to say, look, you need to know who's trying to get into Canada. We think you'd like to know this. And Brian started an investigation, and he found that there was corruption. And he brought that forward, and he was sent back to Canada, and he lost his job, and nobody would listen to him. I know what he was talking about, because I was one of the people that was giving him information. And so what happened to Brian is kind of a siren story as to what happens to whistleblowers. He tried to do the right thing, and he got crushed. And there are many others like that. Because of Brian, I take this quite personally, but I deal with lots of other whistleblowers too. I've done a lot of these cases. What's happening now is that whistleblowers are seen as being valuable. So take, for example, the Panama Papers. I'm assuming everyone knows about that. Somebody decided this is wrong. This is corrupt. This is being used by the bad guys. I'm going to blow the lid off all of this, and they provided that information. I saw a great presentation by one of the reporters from the Toronto Star who worked on that investigation. And he stood in front of a very senior room of people, and he said, I believe that whistleblowers are the highest form of humanity because they put their own interests above, they put everybody else's interests above their own, and they suffer the consequences. The old view of whistleblowers is that they're negative, they're backstabbers, they're using the system to create mayhem, they can't be trusted, they have mental issues, they are selfish. Very, very rarely is that the case. Very rarely. Less than 1% of the reports that I see, and this is backed up around the world, have whistleblowers been malicious? Yes, but it's a very, very small percentage. That's a key fact. I have lots of stories to show here. This particular one is three whistleblowers. The first one, Colleen Rowley, wrote to the FBI. She worked for the FBI, and she was aware of the failure to investigate the laptop that had information about 9/11 on it. Some of you may have seen that story. And she said, we're doing this wrong. The country is at risk because we're not doing this right. The second one, Cynthia Coopier, was an American accountant. She was vice president of internal audit at a company called WorldCom. Anyone here heard of WorldCom? A decade ago, WorldCom was big news in the fraud world, big public company that went boom because of fraud. And she stood up. She was only doing her job. She was internal audit. Her job was to figure out that everything was right, and if it wasn't right, tell people, help fix it. She got dealt with. Not the way you'd expect. Sharon Watkins was vice president of corporate development at Enron, another major corporate scandal, and she took all of her information and it became the basis for a prosecution. There are others. There's the guy that blew the whistle on big tobacco, and there's a lady who was an American police officer who went out and worked in Bosnia, and she found that all the child trafficking was being run by the police, people in the UN, people who were from America working out there, and she blew the whistle. And those two, in fact those three, have all had films made about them. So I think that's a good sort of social measurement standard, right? If Rachel Weisz plays you in a movie about what you did, that's got to be a good thing, right? So I use that to show that whistleblowers are being seen in a different light. I use lots of tools, and one of them I use is media monitoring. And if you look at this, in fact, if you go back way further than this, back to 1985, this is use of the word whistleblower in Canada and Canadian news items. And you can see over the last few years, 2016, remember we're only in November right now, so I'm hoping that that will go above. But whistleblowing is being talked about. That's an important start. Let's talk about what is whistleblowing, where does it come from? I think the idea of people putting their hand up and saying there's something wrong here goes back a long, long time, right? There were civilizations thousands of years ago where it's documented that someone stood up and said this is corrupt, this is wrong. The term, as far as I can find, seems to come from about the 70s, and it's attributed to this guy, Ralph Nader, and he wrote a book called Whistleblowing. Interestingly, a lot of whistleblowers don't like the term whistleblower, the reason being that it's seen to have negative connotations. So let's do a quick experiment. How many people have a bad view of whistleblowers? Be honest. Anyone? There's some people in the room, right? How many people have an unfailingly good opinion of whistleblowers? Some, right? The truth is there's a lot of ambiguity out there. I'm going to show you where that comes from. The UK, some of the people that do what I do is like advocate for whistleblowers, tried really hard to come out with a different term just to move away. Let's leave behind the old negative language and move forward, and they just couldn't do it. So we're stuck with whistleblowing. What I'm trying to do is to show people it's not all about negativity. What I do know is that whistleblower hotlines work. In the world of fraud, I belong to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. In the world of fraud, we've got about 18 or 20 years' worth of statistics about how to fight fraud. And for 20, whatever years it is, whistleblower hotlines have been the most effective way to fight fraud. They're cheap and they work. People call the number, they tell you what's going on, and you find out. Most of the things you're finding out about are secret, like corruption, like fraud, like environmental abuse, you name it, right? I'm going to flip through these slides, but what they show is that by a factor of at least 2, whistleblowing is by far the most effective way to fight these things. And these stats come from fraud, and I've seen other studies by other groups that mirror it. We find about 43% of all fraud cases are detected through whistleblowers. That tells you, nearly half, right? If people use them better, the number would be higher. But the point I want to make here is that these systems can work for anywhere. It can be for-profit, not for-profit. Government, private, publicly traded, it doesn't matter. Any organization can have a problem that whistleblowing can help with. This slide here just shows between 2010 and 2016, this is the rate at which different fraud fighting methods are being adopted. And you can see, once again, the fastest adopted, the most popularly adopted system is whistleblowing. I know a lot about this, and I kept asking myself, why is it that more people don't come forward? Why is it that they don't work well? Why wouldn't you do this? This works. It's simple. Set up the system, and people would tell you what's going on, and you deal with it. Easy. The two main reasons why whistleblowers don't report. Reason number one, whistleblower retaliation. They're scared to report because they don't know what will happen to them. In fact, a lot of whistleblower advocates, I was talking to one the other day, he said, when they call me, I try to dissuade them from reporting because I know the impact it's likely to have on their life. Most of the people that blow the whistle do it anyway. They are selfless. The second reason is that they're scared nobody will do anything, and that's quite true. I know lots of whistleblowers, and we'll see some in a minute, who blew the whistle and suddenly nothing happened. Everything carried on and they got ignored. So what I've said here is that in my view, apart from ignoring them and retaliation, the big issue that we're facing is that organizations don't understand who whistleblowers are, and they don't understand how to set up a system. And if they know those two things, we can do something about this. That's what I set out to do. But let's first talk about why is it that we have these negative perceptions of whistleblowers. If you look at the top line there, those words all come from the world of crime. I don't think that we want to model our world based on the way criminals view their world. I've seen a lawyer stand in front of a room with many more people than this and talk about whistleblowers and refer to them as stool pigeons. That's a negative term. And whistleblowers aren't criminals. Some of them are. That's actually, sometimes they're involved in what's been going on and they stick their hand up. But all of these negative connotations, rat, grass, these are all things that the criminal world talk about, people who tell the police what's going on. That's what we want people to do, right? So why would we adopt those terms? We don't want that.
Sandy,
Yes?
was that lawyer, perchance, a criminal lawyer? Was he in the defense bar?
No. Neither. People think that whistleblowers aren't team players. So think of a case where somebody blew the whistle on something that was going on in a plant, in an industry, in a small town where that plant was the industry. And ultimately the plant went under. People blamed the whistleblower. But the whistleblower wasn't responsible. The whistleblower was trying to act in the interests of everybody to make sure that things were done right. Whistleblowers can't be trusted. Their information is unreliable. And quite often, the last one there, they're accused of having mental health issues. The only mental health issues I've ever seen in my 33 years is the mental health issues that result from whistleblower retaliation, bullying, separation, being ignored, being ridiculed, being hounded. Those are the negative sort of perceptions that we have. And think about how many people as kids were told, don't be a tattletale. Right? I'm taking it to a different level, but I was told that when I was a kid. Being a tattletale is bad. Well, maybe sometimes it is, right? But unfortunately, that sort of concept has moved into the world of whistleblowing, and anyone that says anything about anyone is bad. I've been a police officer for a long time. I don't believe that police officers should be above the law. I don't believe in the thin blue line. If I see a police officer breaking the law, I reported it, and I did so. I reported my own team when I was in a drug squad because I could see that something was going wrong. That's what whistleblowing is all about. So why do whistleblowers become victims? I think there's a number of really key reasons here. You can see what I've got on the slide. The first thing is that quite often people involved in wrongdoing will go to great lengths to hide their wrongdoing and to remove a threat. That's the first reason why whistleblowers get targeted. People that acknowledge, openly make a report through the system, quite often end up getting screwed, frankly, by the people who they're reporting to, because there's someone in the power base who's doing the bad stuff. And they do very malicious things. Ostracization, bullying, physical violence, intimidation, job loss, all sorts of things happen. But they also tend to put around these malicious rumors. And you read Brian McAdam's article in the Citizen from last week. I've met people who say Brian McAdam is mentally unstable. nothing you can say is believable. And they put that out long before he had mental health issues. Secondly, organizational management likes good news. You're doing well, the company's doing well, everything's going great. They don't want to hear there's a problem. Sometimes they do. The good manager will say, if there's a problem, let's fix it. But sometimes, even if the problem isn't at their doorstep, they don't want the bad news to get out. So sometimes management tend to squash these things. I'm going to talk to you just about a couple of cases here. Charbonneau, for me, is a good case. Does everyone know what the Charbonneau Commission was? It was an investigation, a public commission in Quebec. It finished a year or two ago looking at corruption and bribery in the Quebec construction industry. Who was involved? The construction industry, the mob, and the politicians. Straightforward. That's what was shown conclusively. Videos of mobsters putting money in their socks, witnesses talking about politicians with safes so full of cash that they could not close the door. There were whistleblowers in Charbonneau, and this is just one of them. This guy, sorry, I think I've got another slide here that I'll show you. There's the three people. This guy here actually ended up, they brought one of Montreal's top mobsters out to meet with him, who explained to him subtly why it really wasn't a good idea to keep talking about what he was talking about. They tried to bribe him first. They tried to give him a car. When that didn't work, they threatened him. Ultimately, he testified, and he was one of the key witnesses at the Charbonneau Commission. And all this horrendous, like the worst kind of corruption you could imagine, 30-40% being added on every new road, every new building, every new sewage system, every power station. And who's getting the money? The mob and the politicians. Not good. The Charbonneau Commission said a number of things. Take whistleblowers seriously. Do more to protect whistleblowers. Oh, and by the way, ensure that you protect whistleblowers. They said it twice in their findings. That's about preventing whistleblower retaliation. So what did I do about all of that? I sat down and I thought about it for a bit, and I talked to a good friend of mine called David Hutton, who at the time was running an organization to help whistleblowers, to guide them and to show them what's going on. And we couldn't figure out, how can we get this message across? This is so simple. There are people out there in any organization that knows what's going on. If we can just hear what they have to say and fix the problem, we'll be great, right? So what we did is we approached the CSA and we said, you know what, we think this is really important. There's a standard in the UK, there's a standard in Australia, there's one in the US. We think it's time for Canada to have a whistleblowing standard. And it took some time, but the CSA, to their great credit, took it on and said, yes, this is important. And they pulled together a group of 25 people, which included me, was chaired by a prof from Carleton University. It had whistleblowers, it had investigators, people that deal with whistleblowers. It had lawyers, it had all sorts of different people from across the country, 25 people. We worked for a year and we produced a guideline. It's not a standard, it's not law. The whistleblowing laws in this country are so pathetic that they are going to have to change. And if you create a standard that's tied to the laws, as we've heard, if the law goes out, then the standard will be irrelevant. So we made a guideline. This guideline is designed to help people understand what whistleblowing is all about and to explain to an organization what they need to do if they're going to create a whistleblower hotline. This diagram here, it was the only picture in the whole document. It was only about 35 pages. But I like this picture. It kind of encapsulates what we were trying to say. So on the left-hand side there, you've got some of the regular governance and control mechanisms that you have in companies. Internal audit, external audit, risk management, controls, ethics, compliance. These are all things that we have in organizations, big and small, to try and make sure things don't go wrong. And at the bottom, we have what we call a speak-up culture. We'd all like, I hope, to work in a place where if we have an idea, we can put up a hand and say, hey, have you ever thought of this? This would be good. Or, conversely, if you see something going wrong, you can say, those guys in the stockroom, they're stealing stuff. Every weekend I see them stealing. And everyone goes, good, thank you very much. That's good for the organization. We're going to solve the problem. But life doesn't work that way. What you can see there is whistleblowing doesn't replace all of these. Whistleblowing really merely supports those processes. It's just information. And these systems, although simple by concept, and as I'll explain, they're hard to implement, but the concept is we want people to tell us what's going on. And studies have shown that that will lead to a reduced amount of misconduct, because people will know that there are systems that can get them reported. reduced incidence of losses and all of that kind of stuff. It will boost the whole of the integrity management system, and it will lead to employee engagement. An employee who works in a speak-up environment knows that everyone is pulling together in the same direction, and knows that they're part of a team, and knows that if they speak up, everyone will support them and the problem will get dealt with. And it's also been shown, once again, if you run your company well and you have hotline system and you act on the information correctly, that can boost the bottom line. If you're in business, it's all about the bottom line. So I look at all of this and say, so what's not to like here? Why wouldn't you be doing this? In some sectors, hotlines are mandatory. In some professions, they have a hotline. People like engineers and stuff like that. Think about deterrence as well as reporting, and think about raising the level of governance and integrity of the whole system. And this applies in government and in municipalities, anywhere, and there are people who work towards one goal. We came out with a number of benefits that we feel accrue from having a whistleblower hotline, an effective one. The first ones are structural. Obviously, if you have someone that reports things, we can stop that thing from going on. And the more quickly it gets reported, the quicker we can shut it down. If it's fraud or corruption, the longer the fraud goes on, the more money gets stolen. And fraudsters tend to get bold. There's a hockey stick. The longer they go without being caught, the more they steal and the more frequently they steal. If you have corruption in your organization and it gets really bad, as we've seen in the news, some in Canada, but more overseas, you need to stop that, because that can destroy your whole company. So the quicker you find it, the better. Maybe you can get to them before they become a serious problem. So that's an important concept. Important concept, you can identify who the problem people are in your organization and you can get rid of them. You want the right people on the bus. You don't want bad actors in your group. We've said that it supports other management programs, and an engaged fraud and corruption and misconduct-free workplace is going to be a much better place to work. There's another side to this, and that's what we call people benefits. In simple terms, if you act on what whistleblowers tell you, people will believe in management. Imagine if you reported something was wrong and nothing happened. What would your impression of management be? Either that they're involved or that they just don't care. Why would I want to work here? This is not good. If you listen to whistleblowers, more people will come forward. If you can show, we did this, we listened to them, we investigated, we dealt with the problem, we're all good now. Other people, and I deal with people every day, they quite often call on a Sunday evening because they can't bear going into work. They know it's stressful. And every weekend they sit there just thinking about having to go back and having to confront the people that are doing wrong and having to deal with all that stress. And they call on Sunday evening and say, I've got to do something. Those people need to know, I'm going to be heard, I'm going to be protected. So we're talking about morale, we're talking about sending out a positive message and developing a workplace where there's trust. So the CSA agreed to this, and this was published in February of this year, so by the standards of many of the other documents these guys have, it's very new. Interestingly, this document was, at one time during the year, the most downloaded document from the CSA website. I'm not sure if it's still at the top, but it's up there. So people are hearing this. People are seeing. You can download it for free. My company, Grant Thornton, believes in this. It's not just a marketing ploy. We believe in this. We put time and energy and money into getting this going, and we sponsor it so you can download it for free. As Kernahan said, if you go to that website, you'll get a login box. You just need to go click that I'm not a member, register now, and become a member of CSA, which has lots of other benefits. You don't have to pay. It's free. You can just go onto their what's the name? Community of interest, and just read about stuff. It's a great place. And then once you've signed up, go back and click on the link, and there's a picture of the document, and just at the bottom left-hand side of the document, you can download it. It is good. Okay, I'm now going to quickly flip through what's in the document. The first thing is that it is aimed at an organizational level. But there's an awful lot in there that almost anyone can look at and think about to understand some of the concepts that we're talking about. The concepts, I think we've already made clear, are quite simple. Listen to the people that know what's going on. In any organization, stuff's going wrong. When we're at school, we knew who the bullies were. We knew who was smoking behind the bike sheds. Maybe I'm showing my age now. Who's taking drugs in the washroom? I don't know what it is, but we all know, right? The question is, who's going to do something about it? And do the people that need to know, do they know? Because if they don't know, they can't do anything about it. And so we're just talking about tapping into that. What I tell business people is, who do you want the whistleblower to talk to? You want the whistleblower to talk to you so you can be on top of the problem, you can fix the problem. Maybe you'd like them to talk to the police about the criminal activity in your company. Maybe you'd like them to talk to the regulator, the OSC, the SEC, and they'll come and fine you and shut you down, and you'll have a reputational disaster on your hands. I know whistleblowers. In Brian McAdams' case, at least 2 of the 4 police officers who were set over the years to investigate his claims were frustrated by the process and went public. That's how bad that case is. And 2 of them lost their jobs at the police force. It wasn't just Brian. I was interviewed by them. I know who they are. I know those whistleblowers. So we're talking about creating a channel, an effective channel, for those people to put their hand up and for them to be heard, and for us to do something about it, and for us to show everybody, I've done it. We can all see. This is about integrity and trust, and it's about openness, about transparency. There's nothing that we need to hide here. The first thing that we said was, if you're thinking about setting up a whistleblower hotline, there's a lot of conceptual issues that we think you ought to be touching on first, and I've got some of them here. Yes?
Before you get into that, can you talk a little bit about the process, the people who were involved in the process to develop the...
I can. So I don't know when I contacted CSA. I think it was about 2 years beforehand, and we talked a little bit about, we knew nothing about the CSA process or how it works. And so I introduced, anyway, it'll come back to me in just a second. I introduced my friend who was running FAIR, this organization for whistleblowers. David Hutton, thank you. Sorry, I'm having a blank moment there. And David Hutton then spent a long time further working on the concept of how this would happen, and working on trying to get funding for the project, because all these things have to be sponsored by somebody. And ultimately, to its credit, CSA took this one on themselves. David Hutton and the CSA project managers then got involved with the community and people who knew what was going on in the world of whistleblowers, and they picked 25 people. And the CSA have what they call a matrix. So they know they need the right kind of, you need people with professional knowledge, people with the right kind of backgrounds. You need a mix. You can't have all of them from one segment or another. You couldn't have all people like me who do fraud investigations, because I look at things through the way of a fraud investigator. You couldn't have all lawyers, because lawyers look at things in their own way. So we had lawyers from big law firms, from small law firms. Nothing against lawyers, of course. It's always good to slap lawyers, isn't it? People who come from business, people who've been whistleblowers, people from the public sector, people from the private sector. And interestingly, what they found in that process, there was a whole bunch of people who were active in this space who had professional knowledge and had also been whistleblowers. At the first meeting, you have most of it's done by video conference. So we had meeting in Ottawa, a meeting in Toronto with video conference. It was amazing to sit at the table when this finally got moving and look around the room and hear everybody's stories. And looking at their bio and thinking, oh, well, this guy, there's a guy called Edgar Schmidt, he's a lawyer and an engineer, I think, right? And Edgar had the most incredible whistleblower story. And it's in the papers. It's now finally he's being vindicated through the courts, at his own expense, of course. But you just saw these people that had professional knowledge, but they'd been through the ringer. They really knew what they were talking about. And even young people, indigenous people, women, men, it didn't matter. We had to have this mixed group. And then we worked for a year. We sat down and we talked about what do we think this needs to be. We decided it couldn't be a standard. It should be a guideline. And then we started working on, we elected 2 vice chairs. That was me was one, and another lady from industry, works for a big telecoms company that is a good corporate player and believes doing things right. And then we split up into groups once we'd figured out what our big topics were, and we all started working in subgroups on those topics, and then we pulled it all together. And then we had to tie the whole document together, and there's QA, and then CSA decided it should be French as well, so we get a French translation and then a QA of that, and ultimately we got to publish it about a year and a half later. It was the CSA's first express document, which we hadn't realized at the beginning. So it got quite rushed at the end, but it means it's not a great big standard. It's a much shorter document that needs to get out there. People need to know about it, read it, act on it. Kernahan, you had another
I
question?
was going to ask if your understanding of the distinction between a standard that the CSA would use and a guideline. Just your understanding. I'm not asking for the technical one. And,
So,
I'm not sure
a standard, and please, yeah.
Can you go in front of them because that way everybody will be able to hear?
Okay, so a CSA standard is developed with a defined, what we call balanced matrix, and it's a voting matrix, and we have voting positions, and it's balanced so that not one interest category can override another interest category in the votes. And there's typical interest categories are government bodies, government and regulatory, academia, industry people, professionals, and NGOs in some cases. It all depends on the subject matter of the standard as to how that matrix is organized. So a guideline, and then a standard has to go through a certain process at CSA. We have directives, and we have a process that's accredited by the federal government Standards Council of Canada body. And this process involves quality review. It involves a 60-day public review period. These are requirements that we have to have. We have to have the balance matrix, and then it has to have a 30-day balloting period, and all the votes from the ballot have to be what we call dispositioned. So there's a very rigorous process it has to go through, and this typically takes approximately from 12 months to 2 years to develop this type of document, this rigorous standard. A guideline or an express document, for example, it also goes through a certain level of rigor, but it's a lesser level of rigor. It doesn't have isn't required to have a balanced matrix in accordance with our accreditation. However, we still put a committee together striving towards balance as much as possible. I think it still goes through, did it go through a balloting process? Yeah, it goes through, and a 30-day public review process. So our accreditation standard would go through a mandatory 60 days. So the guideline, we put it through a 30-day public review period. Those are the key differences in between a guideline and a standard. And a guideline can be published a lot quicker because it doesn't have to go through the same rigor. It still goes through similar steps, but it's to a lesser degree of rigor. Still quality project.
Thank you. I'm glad you took that one. So from my perspective, this is more of an informational document. It's not bound into regulations or laws or very structured things. It's much more of an informational document. So we get management to think about who's your audience? Who do you want to be reporting to you? What kind of things do you want them to report? How are you going to handle confidentiality? Are you ready to do investigations? What are you going to do if you have a whistleblower retaliation issue? How are you going to protect your whistleblowers if they do come forward? So we want them to think about these issues before they start. I think I've skipped a slide there. This is really straightforward, and I think that when we talked about the benefits of a whistleblower hotline, you can see what we're hoping will happen is really straightforward. We'll deal with the problems. We'll prevent future recurrence or reduce future recurrence of the problem through personnel changes, systems, checks and balances, controls. We'll have impartial investigations, free and fair to everybody, which is very important. The problems will get sorted out fairly, and everyone will get to hear what happens. They won't get the private details of someone who was found stealing money from accounting, but they'll know at a high level a whistleblower report was made, it was investigated, this is what happened. The person was fired, they were sent to the police or whatever it was. We came out with a number of issues that we thought were pretty critical. I want you to understand that this is a nuts and bolts thing. I'll give Kernahan a PowerPoint version of this. If you want it, you can email me. So you don't need to make detailed notes. One of the things that may not come out from the slides, my job here is to show you, is this. You can get a phone number and say it's a hotline. Leave a message or have somebody answer it. You can create a website or you can create an email address where people send reports. That's the nuts and bolts. This isn't about the nuts and bolts. This is about developing a system that engenders the trust of your audience. Do they believe that if they call this number, I'm going to do something about it? Do they believe if you call this number, that it won't go straight into the desk of the guy who's the problem and I'll end up losing my job? So all of this is about trust. Now, how do you do that? It's about transparency. It's about openness and fairness. It's also about not just the system. You call this number, you send this, go to this website. It's about having a management system that protects that. So having all your reports just go to one manager in an operational role is probably not a very good idea, because it's more likely that the problems are going to be right there. So sometimes people choose, internal audit or the legal department or a different group. You want someone who's as far off to the side as possible to try and have impartiality as to where it goes. And then who looks after all of that? There's people doing investigations. Who's at the higher level? Who's saying who should investigate, whether we should investigate, how much we should investigate? Who's saying when it's done? Who's saying what the punishment should be? You need a governance level over that to make sure that the operational side of it is running smoothly. So we've got reporting, that's the basics. We've got investigations. Obviously, from an operational standpoint, a company needs to fix the problem if there's a weakness or if there's a person that's a problem. Look at the bottom things there, though. Protection and remedies for whistleblower. There's a company, a very major retail company, they produce baked goods in this country, that takes this so seriously. They've had a few whistleblowers who they have helped to find another job, because they were living in a poisoned environment. They dealt with their problem, but it was too difficult for them to work, and they went at their expense and they found another position in the right place, in the right town and everything for these people. That's commitment to whistleblowers. Notice about communication, education, and training. Most of it is about what I'm doing today. It's saying this is who whistleblowers really are, not who you think they are. This is what we want you to do if you see something going wrong. This is the kinds of things we want you to talk about, and this is how you do the report. How many people here work for, who are not students, or working in, if you are students, working in the business world in some way? Work for an organization. Does anyone know if their organization has a hotline, a whistleblower hotline? Do you know where it is?
Well, I am talking about my last position,
Yeah.
the mining company.
Okay. Do you know?
They have one of the auditing companies
Okay.
that have a call center in Buenos Aires.
So you knew how to find it, right?
Absolutely.
Good. So
But
there are lots of
the
companies. Sorry, you had to say more?
Yeah, the problem is that the way you contact them have to be a secure way, because there are ways by which they can find out.
Correct. And I'll
where
talk
you
about
are
that.
from.
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a minute. Thank you. So quite often companies have whistleblower hotlines, but nobody who works there knows how to find it. That's not very helpful, right? So we're going to talk about confidentiality and anonymity. It's a very important point in a minute. And lastly, notice what I put there about evaluation and system improvement. You can't just set it up and away it goes and you're happy ever after. You've got to continually monitor to make sure it's working properly, to identify ways that you can improve it. If something changes in your industry, in your business, you had a merger, you're operating overseas, there's a new law, those changes need to be built into your system. This one is really pretty self-explanatory. How many people here have heard of the term tone at the top? It's not a term that I like, but it has a point. If you want to do something in any organization, it's very difficult to get the most junior person and say, okay, off you go. It's going to be like this. It'll be wonderful. Go. It won't happen, right? We need the people at the very top to make it happen. But we also need the people at the very top to demonstrate this is going to happen, I'm going to make it happen, and it's really important to me that it happens and that it works. And I'm going to follow up, and I'm going to show by my behavior that we're going to do this. So commitment from those top people, visible commitment, is really important. See that I've put there about transparency and the structure that allows things to be done confidentially, but it allows everyone to see that it is being done at some level. Management and the speak-up culture. I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit. We've already mentioned what a speak-up culture is. That's the kind of thing that management have to create, right? And the issue with whistleblower hotlines is this. They're based on the trust of your audience. If something happened in this room, let's say we work together every day, we've worked together for 20, 30 years, and then you guys found out that I was, I don't know, fiddling the accounts. and everyone knows me, and they know I'm one of the managers, and they know I'm really popular with the boss, and they know I'm pretty powerful, everyone's got to go, ooh, now what do we do? And you've got to be able to trust that if you report me, someone's going to listen and someone's going to do something about it. And that's not easy to do. What happens if one of you makes the report and one of the other managers finds out about it and comes and says, hey, Sandy, they found out. They know what you're doing. You're going to be investigated, and I get out of town. The two consequences of that is maybe Sandy gets off with the fraud, but the worst consequence is that next time somebody finds out something's going wrong, they're going to go, oh, I'm not going there. I'm not putting my head in that noose. And that's the issue. When I was with the Narcotics Bureau in Hong Kong, we used to deal with major multinational drug trafficking syndicates, sending drugs to places like Canada and the UK and things. If we had an informant on our case, even our biggest case, when we got to court, if anything was going to come out in court that might identify the whistleblower, we would drop our case. That might sound crazy, right? We might spend years working on a major heroin deal, but we would drop the case because if we didn't drop the case and the whistleblower was found, number one, the whistleblower would have been murdered, and sometimes they were anyway. But number two, everyone else would look around and go, oh, I'm not going there. I know what happens if you do that. You're going to die. So you will have just killed any future potential for your whistleblowing hotline. Now, that's a dramatic point I'm using to underline it. But in a business, if people know if you report, you'll get victimized, management will find out there's going to be a problem. So we're going to talk about anonymity and confidentiality in a minute. You need to build a system that allows for investigations. If you work in a mining company or a university, there may not be very many people here who know how to do investigations. So you've got to figure out how you're going to do that and do it in a fair and impartial manner. That's not necessarily easy, but you need to have thought about that and made those arrangements before you have a case. Because if something comes in that says, guess what, Sandy Boucher's stealing millions of dollars every year, and you've got, okay, what do we do? You can't run around at that point and try and find somebody to investigate Sandy, right? You need a process. That's really quite straightforward. I'm going a little fast here, so I'm going to go back just a little bit. So let's talk about confidentiality and security. So to give you an example, everyone knows about Volkswagen, right? Volkswagen had a little itty-bitty issue with, they were cheating on their environmental systems, and they built a system to actually circumvent environmental testing on their vehicles globally. Crazy, right? Absolutely. Who would have believed that beforehand? I'm a cynic, but even I was a little surprised by that. But my next question was, what did it take to make that whole thing work? How many people? Was that one or two people in a little secret lab somewhere? No way, right? That was a big program that a lot of people must have known about. So my mind went to, where were the whistleblowers? How come nobody ever ratted them out? Not meant to say that, am I? How come no one ever told somebody this is wrong? VW is cheating. It says its engines are clean and they're not. In Germany and France, they have laws that are very anti-whistleblower. They don't, or they didn't until very recently, didn't allow anonymous whistleblowing reports because they were too scared of it being used vindictively. Both of those countries have recently brought in anti-corruption laws that now talk about whistleblowers and supporting whistleblowers and anonymity. Our clients have the ability to make anonymous reports. And I'm telling you, if you want to fight whistleblower retaliation, one way is like I'm doing, person by person. Whistleblowers are good. Listen to them. Don't retaliate. They're a precious resource. The other way is give them the ability to make the report anonymously, and hopefully they'll be okay. The truth is, if we all work together, just by the nature of what you reported about me, I might be able to figure out who the whistleblower was. Well, only 3 people in this room knew about that accounting system. So it must be one of them, right? So anonymity is a powerful way. So if you call in our system, the telephone switch erases all information about the number that called it. Even I can't get the number. If I want to go back, I can't get it. And all the way through, we have a process. You can say who you are if you want to. Very often, the whistleblowers that I speak with identify themselves to me because I'm a third party. I don't work at these companies. And they can choose, do you want me to tell your company who you are or not? And quite often they don't. I've done investigations where I knew the whistleblower. I eventually persuaded the whistleblower to meet with me to help me and gather evidence for the investigation, but the company never knew who it was, and they spent a lot of time trying to find out. I know that. And the second way is confidentiality, right? Where do you store your whistleblower information? Who do you talk to about the investigation? Keeping that information confidential. What are you going to do if you come to a legal situation that means you have to disclose, and that can happen. So you need to have thought of all of those things too. So those two things are very important. So I'm just going to go through a couple of other points, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. The points that I've got here, I'm trying to make sure I keep up with the right page. Training. Right. The last point about the structure of the system and how it works is that once you've gone through that process, our view is that you need to have some kind of messaging back to your audience that says, we took a report, or we've had this many reports this year. 15 of them were substantiated, 3 were malicious, the rest we couldn't figure out what was going on. Or we took a report about fraud in the accounting department, we have fired somebody and that person has been charged by the police. So everyone can see. You make a report, they deal with it, and there's a fair outcome. And by the way, we've changed our accounting system so that you can't do that anymore, something like that. So that cycle, that transparent cycle, so everyone can see what's been done. And then the last point, your system will not work perfectly. If you can build the speak up environment, if you can develop trust, if you can run your hotline well and keep information confidential, if you can take reports, if you can act on them and you can find out what's going on and you can deal with them fairly, you can get rid of the bad people, you can close the loopholes, all of that's good, but still you need to be improving on your system. And so I've put down here some of the things that we think you need to do. So we've talked about having that governing level over the top of the operational system. They need to be looking at it to try and understand, is it working? And I've just talked here about some of the ideas that you might use to monitor your hotline. So you might, for example, talk about how many, and you'll see, so I've been dealing with some guys in Ottawa who run the City of Ottawa's hotline system. And they talk about how many they got, how many people, how many were found to be true, how many convictions, how much assets they've recovered, how many people have been convicted, you know, how much dollar losses of fraud they've prevented and stuff like that. So output indicators are really quite straightforward. We've received this many reports, we've investigated this many things. Secondly is satisfaction indicators. And a lot of people look at me like I'm crazy, but if you've got a system and the system is all about you guys trusting the system and making reports, I need to know what you think about it. Because if it turns out everyone says, oh yeah, everyone knows that the HR manager tells her boyfriend in, you know, wherever as soon as a report comes in and everyone knows what's going on. And I need to know that, right? My system's lacking integrity. So employee trust and confidence in the system. Is it easy to find? I did a survey in a company where they said, yeah, we never get any reports on the hotline. We think it's a waste of time. I said, really? Not one? They said, yep, not one. I said, so how do you publicize the hotline? They said, what do you mean? I said, well, like you have posters in the lunchroom, right? They said, no. So does it come up on their screensaver? Is it in your employee handbook? They said, no, that's kind of a good idea. So I said, why don't you go and ask some of your employees if they know where it is? And no one. They said, we have a hotline? Well, that's cool. I didn't know that. Simple, right? Also, you might talk to people who've been through the process one way or another, or other people's perceptions of the process. How did that work? It was scary, it was horrid, it was good, it was bad, this was good, this was bad, this is a problem. Effectiveness, listen, in the world there are people that decide for whatever reason to do the wrong thing, right? Any organization, anywhere. That's always going to happen. So you're never going to have zero, but maybe if you had a particular kind of problem, we have reporting for our clients and you can see trends. There's a lot of fraud in the stock, theft in the stockroom, or particular kinds of problems. And if you can deal with it, you can prevent them from happening, and hopefully you can manage some of the issues that are going on. So looking at how effective they are. And lastly, an efficiency indicator. How long does it take for you to investigate your cases? What's the average time between a whistleblower reporting something and you closing your case? How long does it take whistleblowers to come forward? when they first knew about something to the time when they actually pick up the phone and do something about it. So I just want people to think about this isn't perfect. It's an art to make these things work. A lot of it is mechanics, but bringing it to life and developing the trust and continually improving are important. I have a lot of other slides on this topic, and one of the things I used to like to talk about was called the PSIC, Public Service Integrity Commission, I think it's called. It's the federal whistleblowing organization for all federal public servants. Has a horrible, horrible record. Most of the people that went there didn't even have their complaints investigated. More than 100 of the whistleblowers went to private sector organizations to tell their stories because of whistleblower retaliation mostly, and secondly because people in government didn't want bad news. This is politicians for us, okay? If you're the minister of XYZ and someone stands up and says, guess what? So-and-so has been doing this, or this has been happening, this environmental thing is going on, the message gets squashed. This study, there's a new executive director of this group who seems to be finally heading in the right direction, many years too late. But they did a study of federal public servants. The fact that they did that study is great for me. And what they found, surprise, surprise, is that the reason people don't report is because they're scared of retaliation, which sends a great message back to government, right? Are you serious about whistleblowing? Are you serious about dealing with these problems? Let's see some tone at the top and deal with the retaliation problem. So I'm going to leave that there. I will give you my notes. These are my last sort of thoughts on this. What do I tell people? This is what I tell people. First of all, please don't shoot the messenger. 99-point-something% of the people come forward do it in good faith. They either suspect something's wrong or they know something's wrong. Listen to them. Number two, don't treat them as a bad apple or a nuisance or whatever else. Try and understand what they're going through. Try and understand what it must have taken for them to pick up the phone or to make that web report. Think about the risks that they've taken and that they're facing now that they've taken that step. Look at things from their point of view. It's pretty scary, I can tell you. Thirdly, in your organization, by demonstrating it from management, top to bottom, try and develop a speak-up culture. Why would we not all want to work in a place where we all trust each other, and if something's going wrong, we can stand up and say so? And lastly, develop that employee trust. Protect your whistleblowers. And then the benefits will be self-evident. So I'm going to stop talking there, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Sandy, that was fabulous. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to start off a question while you guys are getting your thoughts together. As for questions, we're going to take them in groups of 3. But just to start this process off, this is a question that I got from somebody who's listening in from London in the UK, and this question was a question concerning what do people feel about incentivizing whistleblowing, and what I'm referring to is you see this now in Canada, in Ontario, and you see it in some other jurisdictions, the United States as well, where essentially the whistleblower will get a potentially very, very large sum of money as part of any successful enforcement action pertaining to whistleblowing. So that's an opening question that came, and thank you very much for the person from London who asked that. I'm now going to turn and get two more questions for this round. I see a question here, and I see a question here. And if you could just identify yourself and ask your question, and then I will repeat it so that it gets on the camera and then and on the microphone, and then we'll have all 3 answered by Sandy.
Jay Darcy, Gart's Leadership Center. And Sandy, you mentioned within the line, judging from recent news, it would be difficult for any police officer, RCMP officer, or military officer not to have witnessed sexual assault and harassment in the workplace. But I'm not hearing about any whistleblowing, just the women themselves eventually coming forward. Were the military and police involved in this development of this guideline? Do you think it's going to be used in that kind of culture?
Very good. Thank you very much. And if you could identify yourself as well, please.
Julie Jallo. I'm a student here at Ryerson and part of the Ryerson Law Members Committee. So my question is, it seems that the fear of malicious abuse of the whistleblower system is
there we go.
Good. Great questions.
Sandy, so three very interesting questions to start the ball rolling.
Great. So thanks very much for the watcher from London. Probably raining in the UK. It's really a very topical question, and one of the reasons why whistleblowing is top of mind, or more top of mind in Canada, is about rewarding whistleblowers. So we have an interesting situation in this country where the OSC, the Ontario Securities Commission, has just set up a whistleblowing unit which launched in July, I believe, and it's modeled and influenced very heavily by their buddies in the Securities and Exchange Commission of the US, who have a very, very successful paid whistleblower hotline system. The largest reward they've paid to whistleblowers is over $30 million. Interestingly, in Quebec, the Quebec AMF, at the same time period as the OSC were looking at this issue of should we reward whistleblowers, did their study and came out with exactly the opposite answer, that in their view whistleblowers should not be compensated. So I'm going to tell you what I think. I don't think there's a simple answer. My experience of whistleblowers is that a very high percentage of them are doing the right thing. And most of those are not interested in or would not be motivated by money, number one. Number two, I'm talking about a very, very wide scope of whistleblowing, from a 10-person charity to a multinational or a government. Small companies do not have the wherewithal to pay rewards. So let's be realistic, a lot of them aren't going to. Let's talk about the securities markets, the capital markets. That's really where most of this comes from. The Americans have a system called key tam cases, which allowed people to report fraud and to get rewarded from some of the money that was recovered. So that's a process that they have in America. We don't have that law here, and we don't have those cases. I've always felt a little doubtful about paying whistleblowers, because the whistleblowers I know are people doing the right things. However, I used to pay whistleblowers when I was a police officer. If I wanted information on a major shipment of heroin coming into Canada or the UK, I didn't go to the local Girl Guide Society and ask questions there, right? I needed someone right in the middle, and those people took risk. Many of them paid with their lives. So I understand about risk and reward. That's fine. Where I've come down now is that when I see what happens to whistleblowers in reality, get out there, read the stories. There's hundreds of them on the internet. There are web pages dedicated to Canadian whistleblowers and what happened to them. You'll see that they suffer. Mostly they lose their job. Sometimes they lose their sanity and their families too. So I'm actually in favor, to the extent that there's a system, I'm in favor of them being rewarded, because what else can we give them except money that can help them rebuild their lives? It's not a black and white. I heard the head of enforcement at the AMF tell his story about why the AMF is not going to do it, and I was like, way to go. I agree with that entirely. But then on the other side, the OSC and the SEC are getting cases that they believe they wouldn't have heard about if they didn't get money, if the whistleblowers didn't get money. And there's also these cases where there are people involved in the crime, which is a tricky area in whistleblowing. There's a famous whistleblower from a Swiss bank who was up to his eyeballs in trying to help people evade taxes, and he went to jail for it, but he blew the whistle. And people say, should he be rewarded or not? That's not my decision to make. My view generally is there's nothing wrong with paying for things. It can have a negative impact. I believe that's more likely to push people to maliciously make a report or to do something or to beef their case a little to try and make money. And most of the people I deal with aren't doing that. So I hope that's enough on that topic. Jane, your question is a great one. You understand I am not in favor of the blue line. No, there were no serving police officers or military involved in the process. Was there any? I don't think we actually had federal government. We had a lot of former federal government. So the government was largely not involved in that. But your mind works exactly the same as my mind. You're dealing with the RCMP, with an organization that has the most fearsome culture, and this is one of the things that needs to be done to rectify that culture. I'm quite happy to go and talk to the Mounties or any other government group that wants to hear what I've got to say. And one day we'll get there. You can't operate without having these systems. It's just, that's why you end up with a chronic problem where the Mounties are compensating their own members to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. That's just plain ridiculous. How did it ever get that bad? Because no one could stand up and say something about it. And the third question, would you mind reading your question again? It was very long. Right. So your question actually contains the answer. My view is that, number one, the idea of malicious complaints is shown to be, by and large, a fantasy. It's not completely zero, but it's so small that you've got to ignore it and build on the basis of all the people who are coming forward in good faith. Number two, I don't think that you need or should have any penalty for malicious complaints. Any company has rules about integrity, codes of conduct, all that kind of thing. If someone comes forward with a malicious complaint that you can show is malicious, then they've acted without integrity, and I'm sure the average organization would have a way to get rid of them. More importantly, if you set up a penalty, we want you people to report anything that goes wrong. I want you to report to me, okay? You got that? By the way, if I catch any of you making a malicious report, I'm coming after you, right? There'll be fines. Immediately, you've just destroyed the whole thing. That message just won't fly. So I don't believe in having penalties for malicious reports. The truth is, the ones that I see, sometimes people see 2 and 2 and make 16. But mostly they come forward in good faith. And the ones that don't, you have to find out quickly so you don't waste resources. And then you have to deal with the person that made the malicious complaint. And mostly they just lose their jobs. We don't want you here. And that doesn't send a negative message to everybody else.
Terribly sorry, but we do have to wrap this up. I think what you can hear from Mr. Boucher's comments is that it's a very fine balance that is involved in these sorts of issues. But this is a really important issue, and that the modern conception of due diligence that companies and other organizations need to have in place these days should encompass and address the issue of whistleblowing in addition to everything else that they're dealing with. So I would like to, on behalf of everybody here and all of the supporting organizations, I'd like to thank Mr. Boucher for an excellent presentation. And I would also like to alert everyone to another excellent presentation later on today at 5:30 today. And this is on forced labor in the supply chains with an excellent set of panelists, some from coming in from the UK in order to make their presentation. If you need any information on that, please reach me afterwards. That's at 5:30 this afternoon. And what else was I going to say? Yes, the Sandy is going to pass to me, and I'm sure Vanessa will as well, her PowerPoints. Those will be posted up on the Ryerson CSR Institute website, along with the URL where you can watch this again or alert your colleagues who weren't able to make it where they can find it. And there's more events coming from the Ryerson CSR Institute, so stay tuned for those. If you're not on the e-list, let me know. And again, thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day.